Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Iranian Intermezzo period and the Western Shia Empire. So maybe these might not be the empires or eras that you are most familiar with, but this I think is a particularly important episode as it will sort of culminate a sort of intermediary period between some very large empires that will come, and sort of perhaps the decline of the Abbasid Caliphate in respect to the Iranian Intermezzo period, and sort of the last of the sort of Song Dynasty era empires in China before ultimately the Mongol invasion in China, as we shall see, and then, for example, some of the larger caliphates to come as well. So this is a very important episode to tie a lot together, and I hope you can learn about these two periods and empires respectively. And as well, from the Iranian Intermezzo period, we'll highlight a specific leader. In this case, it will be Yusuf ibn Tashfin, and from the Western Shia Empire, we will highlight Yuanhao. So, and at the very end, we will have a comparison between the two leaders in the style of Plutarch's parallel lives. So to start off with the first period in this case. So the Iranian Intermezzo period spanned from the mid-9th century to the early 11th century CE Common Era, and was a pivotal era characterized by the dominance of the Iranian and Persian dynasties amid the broader Abbasid Caliphate. So we've covered the Abbasid Caliphate, which was the largest, tied for the 7th largest empire that we've of all time, but the largest empires we've covered so far are the Abbasid and the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid coming after. So sort of within the Abbasid Caliphate, it started to divide, and as we see, there are empires within it, within the Intermezzo period. So these are not fully independent empires, but they were sort of standalone and important to cover regardless. So as we shall see, so this is sort of considered still part of the Abbasid Empire era, but these are important states we should mention as well. This period witnessed significant political, cultural, and military developments, shaping the landscape of the Islamic world. Therefore, we seek to find a history of the Iranian Intermezzo period from the Abbasid Caliphate, which the states rose, and the rise of the Almoravid dynasty. As we'll see, that will become the Almoravid Caliphate, another empire that will follow this Iranian Intermezzo period. However, the Almoravid must be noted as sort of North Africa and Spain, so it's not necessarily in Iran, but I'm sort of trying to group them together because it's sort of the decline or the fragmentation of the Abbasid Caliphate. And as well, within the more traditionally the Iranian territories, we have the Tahirid and Buyid dynasties we'll also cover, which will also ultimately be captured or included within the Almohid Caliphate, which is one I'm excited to cover, which will include Saladin. And the Mongol Empire, as we shall see, will eventually encompass the Western Shia Empire. So, some background information about the Iranian Intermezzo period. So this is a term that I did not invent myself. It's also referred to as the Persian Renaissance, and represents a period in history which saw the rise of various native Iranian dynasties in the Iranian plateau after the 7th century Muslim conquest of Persia and the fall of the Sasanian Empire. The period is noteworthy since it was an interlude between the decline of the Abbasid and rule and the power of the Arabs and the Sunni revival with the Iranian territory, and most significantly, a revived Iranian national spirit and culture in the Islamic form. Although there were some Iranian Zoroastrian movements rejecting Islam altogether as a religion, so it was not sort of lineal progression, as we saw. See, even there's also divisions between Shia and Sunni, but they're predominantly Sunni, but there were subordinate Shia dynasties that ruled within the Abbasid Caliphate, as we shall see. And it also focused on reviving the Persian language, so that's another thing that's noteworthy about the Iranian Intermezzo period, the culmination of Persian and Arabic influences, but the Arabic influences coming from the sort of the more militaristic components, and then the Persian sort of their more scholarly works as well. Or at the same time, the Arabic sort of more through the religion, particularly so, and through the Abbasid Caliphate, but then, on the other hand, other aspects, respectively. So it also was focused on the reviving of Persian languages, so the Persian influence was also and some of the leading families were often Persian, it must be noted as well. So the sort of majority Islam, but occasionally there were some Persian dominant groups. And the most significant Persian language literature period during this period occurred, such as the Shah Nama and the Ferdowsi. Iranian dynasties and entities which comprise the Iranian Intermezzo period are, so the full list include the Tahirids, the Saffarids, the Sajids, the Samanids, which we've covered specifically as it was quite larger and relatively more autonomous. So we have covered the Sasanian dynasty explicitly. The Zayurids, the Buyids, the Salarids, the Rawadids, the Marwanids, the Shadadids, the Kukayids, the Anazids, and the Hassanwayahids, and as well we will also be covering the Almoravid dynasty. So we're going to highlight particularly the Tahirid, the Buyid, and the Almoravid dynasty, because when I was compiling the original list of the empires, these are the three that made the list of largest empires. So all those other ones, excluding the Samanids, because the Samanids was even larger, the other ones didn't quite make the list. So by highlighting these three, I think we can get a good feeling for what this Iranian Intermezzo period is, and as well sort of the Almoravid dynasty, which is in North Africa and Spain and Portugal as well. We can get a picture of sort of what was happening during this time before the rise of some very large empires that we'll see will be the new largest empires to date. So first, a little bit more background information about the Abbasid Caliphate, which existed from 750 to 1258 CE. So its establishment, the Abbasid Caliphate succeeded the Umayyad Caliphate, so in 750 CE, tied for the largest empires we've covered so far, with its capital initially in Baghdad and tied for 7th of all time. It represented a golden age of Islamic civilization and marked this advancement in science, philosophy, and arts. As for central authority and erosion, by the mid-9th century, however, Abbasid Caliphate experienced a decline in its central authority, a common theme amongst empires that we've seen in their declines, providing governors, often Iranian or Persian descent, began to assert more autonomy, so these Persian sort of leaders, leading to the rise of regional dynasties, which we shall cover here. So starting, for example, with the Tahirid dynasty, which lasted from 821 to 873 CE, so not too long-lived, but quite large. The founding, so the Tahirid dynasty, emerged as a significant power in the Iranian Intermezzo period, founded by Tahir ibn Hussein, hence the name, Tahirid, a Persian general serving under the Abbasids. So he was a general under the Abbasids, eventually forming his own dynasty within the Abbasid Caliphate. And the Tahirids governed the province of Khorasan, encompassing parts of modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan, as semi-autonomous rulers. So it's important to note these because it is a very large area of land, as we shall see on the map, but nonetheless it was sort of not entirely autonomous. As for cultural and administrative contributions of this dynasty, under the Tahirid rule, Persian cultural administrative traditions experienced a revival. So there is this underlying Arabic influence through the religion, through the Abbasid Caliphate, but these Persian dynasties rise up and grow in their own rights and sort of grow that sort of language and culture. As for the Persian language and literature, flourished, and the Tahirids played a significant, crucial role in preserving and promoting Persian culture within the Islamic world. To what extent would Persian identity still exist? Well, Persian identity is still very strong today, but to what extent is it strong today because of the Tahirid dynasty can never be tested, but I'm certain to some degree it has been enhanced through this influence early in history, or relatively early in history. We're about in the Middle Ages now. So as for the Buyid dynasty, another important dynasty to sort of get a feel for this Iranian Intermezzo period. So the Buyid dynasty lasted from 934 to 1062 CE. So as for its founding, the Buyid dynasty composed three brothers, Ahmed, Ali, and Hassan, originally from the Daylam region, and they rose to prominence during the Iranian Intermezzo period. They established their rule over the Fars, which is in modern-day Iran, and gradually expanded their territory to include much of modern-day Western Iran and parts of Iraq, many of the areas that the Tahirids had formerly ruled over even. But nonetheless, they succumbed to power struggles as well. The Buyids initially served as military commanders under various rulers, but later asserted themselves as independent rulers, so forming autonomy. They often clashed with their Abbasid Caliphate, seeking control over Baghdad and influence over the caliphs, but never entirely autonomous, however. As for their cultural patronage, the Buyids were patrons of Persian culture and literature, so once again, bringing to this Persian influence that's sort of indicative of the Iranian Intermezzo period. Supporting poets, scholars, and artists. They contributed to the flourishing of Persianate culture during their rule and fostered a revival of Persian traditions in the region under their control. It must be noted there's been previous Persian dynasties we've covered, some of the largest as well, even larger than this, in this period, that we've covered. Not as large as the Umayyads or Abbasid caliphates, for example, but still very large previous Persian dynasties, or Persian empires, which we've covered. As for the Almoravid dynasty, so this one's a bit different, and pardon me for including it arbitrarily with the Iranian Intermezzo period, but it's during the same time, and it's also subordinate to the Abbasid Caliphate, so I think it's important to highlight. And it's also included in our list of largest empires, and we did not want to gloss over it. So as for the rise of the and it lasted from 1040 to 1147 CE. So as for the rise, the Almoravid dynasty emerged in the Maghreb region in North Africa in the mid-11th century, founded by Abdallah ibn Yassin, who we will cover in a specific biography, or pardon me, we will cover Yusuf ibn Tashfin in a specific biography. It was founded by Abdallah ibn Yassin, a glorious leader. The Almoravids initially focused on spreading their puritanical form of Islam and contributing to Berber tribes. So there's a clash of cultures here between the Berbers and the Abbasids, traditionally speaking, and Islam too. As for the expansion, under leaders like Yusuf ibn Tashfin, whom we will cover in the specific biography, pardon me, and the Almoravids expanded their territory, conquering the western Maghreb and parts of the Al-Andalus, which is in Muslim Spain. So this is bringing this Islamic influence to Spain that still exists today. And their military campaigns aimed to unify Muslim territories and defend against Christian Reconquista efforts in Iberia. So one of the earlier clashes we see, we've covered a bit of the Crusades, and we'll cover more Crusades in much more detail to come, but clashes also between Christians and Islam in here, Spain, for example, as well at these early times. But as for the decline of the Almoravid dynasty, despite early successes, internal divisions and external pressures led to the decline of the Almoravid dynasty. Their control of the Al-Andalus weakened, and they faced challenges from the rival Berber dynasties like the Almohads, which we'll cover specifically, which is a caliphate in its own right and even larger. And the Almoravid dynasty, but it's considered the successor of the Almoravid dynasty. But the Almoravid dynasty eventually fell in 1147 CE, marking the end of their rule in North Africa and Spain. So thus the Iranian Intermezzo period, characterized by the dominance of the Iranian dynasties like the Tahirids and Buyids, played a crucial role in the shaping of the cultural, political, and religious landscape of the Islamic world. It witnessed the flourishing of Persian culture and the rise of regional powers and the eventual transition to new dynasties and empires such as the Almoravids in North Africa. So there's important period. I hope that helped explain sort of an intermezzo period, an intermediate period before some very large empires we shall see to come. And now we shall discuss the specific leaders to kind of see maybe what some of the leadership might have manifested like during this period, specifically in this case from the Almoravid dynasty. So Yusuf ibn Tashfin, perhaps the most important ruler of the Almoravid dynasty, allegedly. So Yusuf ibn Tashfin, also Teshufin, or his other names, reigned from circa approximately, that means 1061 to 1106 CE, and was a Sanhaja leader from the Almoravid Empire. He co-founded the city of Marrakesh, a beautiful city in Morocco, which I've been very fortunate to visit, and led the Muslim forces to the Battle of the Sagrajas. So if he had not created that city, maybe I never would have traveled there, and had I never traveled there, maybe I wouldn't have been so passionate about history as I am. So maybe thanks to Yusuf ibn Tashfin, or at least for creating that great city. So as for the early life of Yusuf ibn Tashfin, Yusuf ibn Tashfin was born in the early 11th century in the Berber region of Maghreb, perhaps a Berber himself, which corresponded to modern-day Morocco, or at least perhaps some Berber blood. Little is known about his early life, but it is believed that he hailed from a noble Berber family, in fact, with a lineage tracing back to the indigenous tribes of North Africa. So as we can see, perhaps during the Iranian era, or Intermezzo period, or more the Iranian area, we saw the Persian sort of dynasties rose within the Abbasid Caliphate. Here we have a Berber dynasty rising within the Abbasid Caliphate as well, and specifically with this Yusuf ibn Tashfin. His upbringing was marked in a region, however, with political instability and tribal leaders would shape his future ambitions and strategies as a ruler. So it wasn't all easy. It wasn't like he was born in a heavily guarded palace. He was among many leading tribes, despite being the head of one tribe, however. But still, much privileged background on the balance of probabilities. As a youth, Yusuf demonstrated exceptional leadership qualities and military prowess, earning him respect and admiration among his peers and elders. So both. Some just receive admiration from their elders, and some just receive their admiration from their peers. Some just receive admiration from women, some just receive admiration from men. But he seemed to at least have received both from young and old. As for his rise to power, Yusuf ibn Tashfin's ascent to power began when he joined the Almoravid movement, led by the charismatic preacher Abdallah ibn Yassin, the first leader of the dynasty. So there's this charismatic leader that he sort of follows. Inspired by Ibn Yassin's call for religious revival and unity among the Muslim communities in North Africa, Yusuf quickly rose through the ranks of the Almoravid movement, eventually becoming its military commander. But not directly linked to this leader by blood, sort of rising through the ranks, but also building a close relationship with the most powerful leader. Under Yusuf's leadership, the Almoravids waged a series of successful military campaigns against rival Berber tribes and local rulers, so sort of a military leader and conqueror that he followed, consolidating their control over the Maghreb region, including Morocco, which would become Morocco. Yusuf's strategic brilliance and battlefield tactics earned him the loyalty of his followers and solidified his position as the de facto ruler of the Almoravid movement after the leader of the original founder. As for his own expansion and conquest, with Yusuf ibn Tashfin at the helm, he came to power. The Almoravid dynasty embarked on a period of rapid expansion and conquest. In the 11th century, Yusuf led his forces across the Strait of Gibraltar, a place of unfortunate visit of links Europe and Africa, with monkeys there, or at least there are monkeys today, into Al-Andalus, connecting to Spain, Muslim Spain at the time, where he intervened in the ongoing conflicts between various Muslim Taifa kingdoms and the Christian states. So quite a successful military leader he was. Yusuf, and it's still today a significant military stronghold because that's sort of the choke point between the two continents. As for his expansion and conquest, with Yusuf ibn Tashfin at the helm, the Almoravid dynasty embarked on a period of rapid expansion and conquest. In the mid-11th century, Yusuf led his forces across the Strait of Gibraltar, once again mentioned, and was successful in military campaigns there. Yusuf's military campaigns in the Al-Andalus, modern Spain, were marked by decisive victories against the Christian forces, including the famous Battle of Zalaca in 1086 CE, where he defeated the combined armies of Alfonso VI of Castile and Sancho Ramirez of Aragon, two very famous names. These victories solidified Almoravid's control over much of Muslim Spain and established Yusuf as a formidable ruler in the region, and also demonstrating the autonomy of their dynasty with respect to the Abbasids. As for his administration and governance, as the ruler of the Almoravid dynasty, Yusuf ibn Tashfin implemented a centralized system of administration and governance. He established strong military and administrative structures to maintain control over his vast empire. So, common theme amongst powerful empires is centralization, but not necessary. But in their decline, it's often a theme as well for them to lose their centralization. Appointing loyal governors and administrators to oversee provinces and ensure compliance with his policies. Yusuf promoted Islamic law and culture throughout his domains, sponsoring scholars, theologians, and jurists to uphold the principles of Sharia and propagate Sunni Islam. His patronage of learning scholarship contributed to the intellectual and cultural vibrancy of the Almoravid dynasty. So he himself bringing Sunni religion, despite perhaps being from a noble Berber descent, not necessarily not Islamic, but not sort of the traditional Abbasid Islamic individual. As for his legacy and influence, Yusuf ibn Tashfin's reign marked the zenith of the Almoravid dynasty, hence considered the most important ruler of this dynasty and their power and influence. Under his leadership, the Almoravids became one of the most dominant political and military forces in the Western Islamic world, controlling vast territories stretching from North Africa to the Al-Andalus. Still has influences here today. Yusuf's military conquest and administrative reforms laid the foundation for the Almoravid Empire's stability and prosperity. Although his reign was not without challenges and internal conflicts, Yusuf's legacy and visionary leadership and skilled commandership ability endures as a testament to his enduring influence on the history of the Maghreb and the Al-Andalus, and sort of epitomizing what it takes to be a successful leader under and create a dynasty within the Abbasid Caliphate and to assert autonomy within an existing empire. So that is Yusuf ibn Tashfin and the Iranian Intermezzo period. To discuss the content of the slide before the next empire. So title, Yusuf ibn Tashfin and the Iranian Intermezzo period. It was a period in history with the rise of the various Iranian dynasties after Muslim conquest of Persia and the fall of the Sasanian Empire. And the Sasanian Empire was sort of also within the Iranian Intermezzo period, and more so the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate. But many of the Intermezzo period is included before and after the Sasanian Empire, which we've covered. So for this specifically, we're covering from the Abbasid Caliphate and within the Abbasid Caliphate to the Tahirid, Buyid, and the Almoravid dynasties are the ones we're highlighted specifically. So the significant leader was Yusuf ibn Tashfin. The empire was the Buyid dynasty, the Tahirid dynasty, and the Almoravid dynasty. So the period, a lot of dates here. So the Almoravids were from the 1050s to the 1147. The Tahirids were from 821 to 873. The Saffarids were from 861 to 1003. The Sajids were from 889 to 929. The Samanids were from 875 or 819 to 999. Sort of that's how they had relative greater or lesser autonomy with respect to the Abbasids. The Zayirids from 930 to 1090. The Buyids from 934 to 1062. The Salarids from 942 to 979 CE. And those are the empires we covered in this sort of the Iranian Intermezzo period, and plus, as we added, the Almoravid dynasty, which is more to the west. The modern locations include Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Spain. Also Turkmenistan. Million square kilometers was 1 for the Tahirids, or the equivalent of 0.39 million square miles. That's for the Tahirids. For million square kilometers, 1.6 for the Buyids, or 0.62 million square kilometers for the Buyids, or 1 million square kilometers for the Almoravid, or 0.39 million square miles for the Almoravid. So about the average empire size we have is 1.14 or 1.17, so a little bit larger than, so Buyid's a little bit larger than our average empire, the Almoravids slightly larger than our average empire, but nonetheless they're sort of subordinate to the Abbasid Caliphate, which is the 7th largest empire of all time, and the largest we've covered so far. So very difficult regions to cover and exert autonomy, but also sort of they had the oversight of the Abbasid Caliphate. So take what we will with that information. So percent of the world, excluding Antarctica, was 0.74% for the Tahirids, 1.19% for the Buyids, and 0.74% for the Almoravids. Must be included as well the relative sort of nomadicy. How nomadic are the people there is harder to rule over a place with lots of fortresses than a place where there's a lot of nomadic people and it can be just sort of run over with horses, to put it bluntly. As for the government, so for the Tahirids, they were a de jure governorate. For the Buyids, they were a sultanate, and they were a nominal vassal with the Almoravids, and all three were subordinate to the Abbasids. The common languages include Early Persian, New Persian, Daylami, which was the language of the ruling dynasty of the Buyids, Berber languages as well, Arabic, and Mozarabic. And the religions was Sunni Islam, but as well the Shia, for example, the Daylami, who were the ruling dynasty of the Buyids, with themselves were Shia, so they had a different religion, sort of more like the Fatimid Caliphate we've seen. So you see there's nuances within these empires. They're not all Sunni Muslim like the Abbasid Caliphate, and they're not all necessarily Arabic. Some of them are more Persianate, some are more Berber, so nonetheless important to include these empires, I thought, and they made the list of largest empires, and they exerted sufficient autonomy to be considered empires in their own right. And I think it also connects sort of where we're coming from the Abbasid Caliphate, as we shall see as we come up to some, for example, Saladin and his empire is one I'm very much looking forward to. So without further ado, however, we will move to the Western Shia Empire. And my apologies in advance for any mispronunciations. I'm endeavoring to be sort of phonetically, trying to be endeavor to be correct, not being a native speaker, but also try to be sort of phonetical as well. So if someone's listening and wants to write something down, they might be able to follow. So, but nonetheless, it's Western Xia, but it's spelled Xia. So the Western Xia, also known as the Tangut Empire, was a state that existed in northwestern China from 1038 to 1227 CE, Common Era. It was founded by the Tangut people, an ethnic group related to the Tibetans. So we've covered the Tibetan Empire, so we can see some perhaps parallels here, who established their capital in Xingqing, Xingqing, which is in modern-day Yinshuan, Yinchuan, in what is now Ningxia province, Ningxia province. Therefore, we seek to find a history of its rise and fall. So the Western Xia, or Xixia, which is officially Great Xia, which it translates to, also known as the Tangut Empire and known as Minyak. I also see the translation of Xia can also mean summer as well, and it's also seen connected with the word of high as well. So perhaps high summer, but it's also considered white high as well. To the Tanguts and the Tibetans, and as well as it was also a Tangut-led Buddhist, so it must be notably Buddhist, imperial dynasty of China. So we've covered many other imperial dynasties. This is one sort of very important one that existed from 1038 to 1227, and it interacts explicitly with the Song dynasty and the Liao dynasty, the Khitan dynasties, empires, which we've covered both of those. So this is sort of the third major Chinese empire in the region at the time. At its peak, the dynasty ruled over modern-day northwestern China, including parts of Ningxia, Gansu, and eastern Qinghai, and which is in northern-day Shanxi, in northeastern Xinjiang, and southwestern Inner Mongolia and southwestern Outer Mongolia, measuring about 800,000 square kilometers, or up to 1 million square kilometers as well. But as we shall see, this is sort of a third of these three great empires, not relatively consolidated into three empires. But as we shall see, the Mongols will be sort of the next great leading empire I believe we will come to in this region, and it will be the largest empire we've covered to date. As for the rise of the Western Xia Empire or dynasty, pardon me, I forgot to talk about the content of this. The images of the slide. So in the images of the map here, we have the three maps for the Iranian Intermezzo period. Here's the coin of Yusuf ibn Tashfin. Here's the map of the Almoravid dynasty. Here's the map of the Tahirid dynasty. Here's a map of the Buyid dynasty. And here is the Panamur Mosque of Sabzevar. And here is an image of the Black Banners raid by the Battle of Sagrajas, an 1899 illustration by Alfredo Roque Camiro. So the Almoravids adopted the black standard to show their sort of connection with the Almoravid Caliphate. So, pardon me, back to the Western Xia Empire. Pardon me to jump around. So, as for its Tangut origins. So the Tangut people originated from the Tibetan plateau. So we've covered the Tibetan Empire, so I can jump around here, and migrated into the region of present-day Gansu and Ningxia during the Tang Dynasty. So the Tang Dynasty was a dynasty that ruled over the region before, but then during some individuals from Tibet sort of migrated into the region, and little did they know perhaps that eventually they would rule over the region. And the Tang Dynasty lasted from 618 to 907 CE, and we covered it. They initially served as the vassals to the Tang and subsequent Chinese dynasties as well, so they're subordinate, but eventually would come to rule over the region, so quite a success story, at least from their own perspective. So as for the establishment of Western Xia, in the 11th century CE, the Tangut chieftain Li Yuanhao, who we'll cover in a specific biography, rebelled against the Song dynasty, which ruled over much of China at the time. Li Yuanhao declared himself as emperor and established the Western Xia Empire in 1038, adopting the title Great Khan for himself. So Khan is sort of a more nomadic leader name, so it's sort of perhaps alluding to the mix between the Sinicization or the Chinese or the Han culture, but also sort of the relative barbarians as they were called, but also connection to, as well, Tibet. So and this was in 1038, he established himself as well emperor and as well great Khan. As for expansion and consolidation, under Li Yuanhao, whom we will cover in a specific biography, and his successors, Western Xia expanded its territory through military conquests and alliances with neighboring tribes. They extended their control over parts of present-day Gansu, Ningxia, Qinghai, and Shanxi provinces. As for cultural and religious development, the Western Xia developed its own distinctive culture, blending the Tibetan, Chinese, and Central Asian influences, so quite a mixture here. They adopted Buddhism as the state religion and sponsored translation of Buddhist scriptures into the Tangut language, so quite a unique dynasty or Chinese empire we have here. Or even to call it Chinese necessarily might be a misnomer, because it does have Tibetan origins, but also Central Asian origins as well, and even relative barbarian origins or nomadic origins, but Buddhist as well. So as for the height of its power, as for its military strength, by the 12th century CE, the Western Xia had become a formidable military power in northwestern China. Their cavalry forces were renowned for their skill on horse archery. I always say horse archery is fascinating, because if a horse is going 60 miles per hour, and you shoot an arrow 100 miles per hour, the arrow is going 160 miles per hour, so it adds the velocity. But if you shoot backwards, it detracts. But nonetheless, a lethal force. And they frequently clashed with the Song dynasty, which is a very large dynasty, which we've covered previously. I'm grateful if you've supported it. To the east, and the Liao dynasty to the north, which we've also covered, also known as the Khitan Empire, which is also quite nomadic in many ways. As for the diplomatic relations, Western Xia maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring states, including the Khitan or Liao dynasty and the Qin dynasty, Jin, which succeeded the Liao dynasty after. We've also covered the Qin dynasty and its multiple periods. They often played these powers against each other to maintain their independence and expand their territory. So that's a very useful thing. So not only knowing when to fight, how to make alliances, but also how to know how to make people fight against each other is also a tactful strategy. As for cultural achievements, Western Xia made significant contributions to art, literature, and architecture during the period. Tangut calligraphy, painting, and ceramics flourished, and many Buddhist temples and monasteries were constructed, showcasing the empire's rich cultural heritage. But nonetheless, like all other empires we come to so far, comes its decline and fall. So the conflict with the Qin dynasty, that's Jin dynasty, which we've covered, despite their military prowess, Western Xia faced increased pressure from rising Qin dynasty, which sought to expand its control over northern China. In 1205 CE, Qin launched a major invasion of Western Xia, leading to decades of intermittent warfare. As for internal strife, the Western Xia also faced internal strife and succession disputes, which weakened their ability to resist external aggression. Factionalism among ruling elite and discontent among population further undermined the empire's stability. So often there's these internal factors that make the external factors worse, and the external factors that make the internal factors worse. And this seems to be the case certainly here. As for the siege of Xingqing, that's Xingqing, in 1226, the Qin dynasty launched a final assault on Xingqing, the capital of Western Xia. After a prolonged siege, the city fell to the Qin forces in 1227, marking the end of the Western Xia Empire. Li Sun Shu, that's Zunxu, the last emperor of the Western Xia, was captured and executed, and the Tangut people were assimilated into the Mongol Empire, which conquered the region shortly afterwards. Shortly after the Qins defeated them, the Mongol Empire, which we will cover, came into the territory. And they were assimilated into the Mongol Empire. So even, they say, allegedly 1 in 8 people or 1 in 4 people have connection to Genghis Khan directly, but maybe those within the Mongol blood as well, Tangut blood, as we shall see, as we might observe. So nonetheless, the fall of the Western Xia also paved the way for the rise of the Mongol Empire, which would soon conquer much of Asia under the leadership of Genghis Khan, a very important empire and leader, and very great inspiration for me to be fascinated in empires. Khan Eagledun's Wolf of the Plains series, very much an influence for me, and Genghis Khan too. But as we've already seen, so many Khans, great Khans that led long before Genghis Khan. So very much learning much through this series. So as for a specific leader, Li Yuanhao, the founder of the Western Xia Empire. So Emperor Xingzong, that's Jingzong of Western Xia, from 1003 to 1048 was born Li Yuanhao, or Tuobo Yuanhao, also known as Shao Yuanhao, or Weiming Yuanhao, or Weiming Nianxiao, was the founding emperor of the Western Xia dynasty of China, reigning from 1038 to 1048. So living from born in 1003 CE, began reigning in 1038, so when he was 35 he came to power, and dying in 1048, so dying when he was 45, so reigning for 10 years. And he was the eldest son of the Tangut ruler Li Deming, so coming from the leading Tangut family. So as for his early life and rise to power, Li Yuanhao, also known as Emperor Xingsheng, was born in 1003 into the Tangut tribe, an ethnic group related to the Tibetans, what is in modern-day Ningxia province is where he was born, but related to Tibetans. And we've covered the Tibetan Empire, very unique empire as well. But he was born in modern-day China. Little is known about his early life, but he rose to prominence as a military leader during a time of political turmoil in northern China. In 1032 CE, Li Yuanhao led a rebellion against the ruling Tang dynasty, which was in decline. We covered the Tang dynasty, great empire at one point, but like all came to decline, and he declared himself emperor. He adopted the reign title Xingsheng and established the Western Xia Empire in 1038 CE with its capital Xingqing, which is in modern-day Yinchuan. So sort of with the decline of the Tang Empire, he capitalized it, not being of necessarily Han or Chinese descent, more so Tibetan descent or Tangut descent, but he claimed himself emperor, forming his own empire, the Western Xia. So as for his consolidation of power, that wasn't all for him. As the founder of the Western Xia Empire, Li Yuanhao faced numerous challenges, including opposition from rival tribes and incursions from neighboring Chinese dynasties such as the Song and Liao, two important dynasties we've covered. However, he proved to be a skilled military strategist and diplomat, consolidating his power through a combination of military conquests and alliances. Li Yuanhao expanded his territory in Western Xia through a series of military campaigns, bringing neighboring tribes and territories under his control. So he continued to conquer, but maybe it was through necessity. Maybe after claiming himself emperor, he sort of couldn't stop the momentum. But nonetheless, he continued. He established a system of governance based on the Tangut customs and traditions, blending in elements of Chinese and Tibetan administration, notably the Chinese system of centralized authority, which has been a common theme throughout even its earliest dates, even relative to other centralized empires at their times. As for his cultural and religious patronage, one of Li Yuanhao's notable contributions was his patronage of Buddhism, a unique feature of at least this empire. He sponsored the construction of Buddhist temples and monasteries throughout Western Xia, including the famous Western Xia Pagoda, which I suggest looking at images of, beautiful in Ningxia. Li Yuanhao and I hope to visit someday. Li Yuanhao also commissioned a translation of Buddhist scriptures in the Tangut language, contributing to the spread of Buddhism among the Tangut people, who would ultimately become assimilated into the Mongols. But nonetheless, perhaps that influence maybe still exists today in some extent. Additionally, Li Yuanhao promoted Tangut culture and art, so he sort of brought that as well, which is a unique influence that was important to maintain, fostering the development of Tangut calligraphy, painting, and ceramics. He encouraged the use of Tangut script for official documents and inscriptions, contributing to the preservation of Tangut language and literature. As for his military campaigns and diplomacy, throughout his reign, Li Yuanhao engaged in frequent military campaigns to defend Western Xia Empire from external threats and expand its territories, so both defense and offense. He waged wars against neighboring Chinese dynasties such as the Song and Liao, as mentioned, as well as rival tribes in Central Asia, traditionally barbarians or nomadic peoples. And ultimately, those peoples rightfully was right to be feared. That's why the Great Walls of China were built, which apparently would extend through half the equator, so very, very long. It was a fear of the Mongols, and ultimately, rightfully so, because Genghis Khan is soon to come. Li Yuanhao also pursued a policy of diplomatic engagements, as mentioned, forming alliances with neighboring states and paying them off against each other to maintain independence for the Western Xia Empire, so playing them against each other. His diplomatic skill and military strength allowed the Western Xia to thrive as a regional power in northwestern China. As for his legacy and the end of his reign, Li Yuanhao's reign marked the beginning of the Western Xia's golden age. So not necessarily at the peak himself, but he started it. So as also whoever's at the peak, necessarily things decline after them, so it's not always great to be at the peak. but he was the founder. His leadership also laid the foundation for the empire's subsequent growth and prosperity under his successor, so good succession planning that things continued well after him, at least for a time. Li Yuanhao died in 1048, reigning for 10 years, leaving behind his legacy of military conquest, cultural patronage, and diplomatic acumen, centralization particularly, and Buddhism as well. He was succeeded by his son, Liang Zhuo, who continued his father's policies and further expanded the Western Xia Empire. Although Li Yuanhao's reign was relatively short, his contributions to the history and culture of the Tangut people endure. He is remembered as the founder of one of the most significant empires in Chinese history. So very, very important leader and founder as well, which I think is holds an important place in history to be a founder of a state. So, as for the content of the slide, Li Yuanhao and the Western Xia Empire is the title, also known as Shi Xia, or Great Xia, or Da Xia, or the Tangut Empire. It was a Tangut-led Buddhist imperial dynasty of China, also known as White Hai Xia. White and Hai are associated with them, perhaps a connection to their perhaps Tibetan origins and their connections with the mountains, perhaps. I'm plugging in my laptop, my apologies. It's all over the place, but at least we found it. Okay. As well, so as a significant leader was Emperor Xingshang or Tuobo Yuanhao. That's also known as Li Yuanhao. Empire was Western Xia. The period is 1038 to 1227, the post-classical period it is called. Modern location is China. It was entirely emerged within those boundaries. Million square kilometers was 1, so our average is 1.17 or 1.14, so a little bit smaller, but about average size empire. But also note, it's a region that had been warred over for centuries, so it's not like it was an easy area of land to rule over. And million square kilometers, and there will be many more wars fought over this region to come. A million square kilometers or million square miles equivalent would be 0.39% of the world, excluding Antarctica, 0.74%. Capital was Xingqing, which is in modern-day Yinshuan. Government was a monarchy, hereditary monarchy. In Blackstone's commentary of the laws of England, he notes there are two types of monarchies. There's the elective and there's the hereditary. So this would be a hereditary monarchy. As we saw, our first example of the elective monarchy was actually in the Holy Roman Empire. At least so far, that's the first that I can think of. As for common languages, we're Tangut and Chinese. Tangut being from the ruling family, but Chinese probably the majority. Religion was Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and folk. For Taoism and Confucianism, I'd be grateful if you check out my History of Leaders of Thought series. Population was in the millions. And the population for the Iranian Intermezzo period were in the several millions as well. So think of the Shishia perhaps similar in size to about many of the empires within the Iranian Intermezzo period and the Almoravid dynasty. Maybe the Almoravid dynasty being slightly larger, or pardon me, the Buyid dynasty being slightly larger. So as for the images on the top left, we have Da Xia, in Chinese characters. Below that, and to the left, we have Tangut officials. So you can see an image as to how they might dress and how they might have looked, or their hats and their orange outfits. To the right of that, we have Xia stone inscriptions, so to see sort of also drawings of them with their own hands. So great relics, great pieces of history. If I could ever own such pieces, I'd be grateful. But I think that's too materialistic. It belongs in a museum, I think Indiana Jones would say, so I take that back. It's for the public. To the right of that, or at least not for my own private ownership. As for a painting of a warrior, to the right of that is a painting of a warrior from the late Western Xia tomb in Gansu. I made this very large, but I think it's fascinating because it's from a tomb, you can really see up close how they might have looked and how they might have dressed, and I think it's really glorious, and I think it's heroic, and pardon me, I made it large. Maybe we could have fit another image in there, but it fit, and I think it's glorious, and I think it looks nice. And I really admire also the armor, too. As for additional information, we have rebellion against Li Xingyan against the Song dynasty was in 984 CE. The dynasty was established by Emperor Xingshang in 1038 CE. The subjugation by the Mongol Empire came in 1210 CE, and the destruction by the Mongol Empire came in 1227 CE. We'll cover the Mongol Empire soon, and we've covered the Song Dynasty, and we've covered the Liao and Khitan Empire. Below that, we have some text in the Tangut text. Unfortunately, I was not able to find a translation because it's an image, not a text character, so I could not copy and paste it. There's got to be software for that somewhere. That would be grateful if someone could direct me to, or provide me with the translation. I'd be grateful for that too. As for the first emperor, Emperor Xingshang, 1038 to 1048, Emperor Renshang, 1139 to 1193, a notable emperor, and Li Xian was the final emperor in 1226 to 1227 CE. It was preceded by the Dingnan, not empire, but group, the Jiedushu people, the Shilangfu people, the Guiyi circuit, the Gansu Uyghurs kingdom, and also the Liao dynasty and the Song dynasty, which they claimed territories from. And it was also followed by the Mongol Empire, but also the Qin dynasty, Jin, also put in significant threats as well, but we've covered the Qin dynasty because it has two periods, so we've already covered the Qin dynasty, but ultimately it would be the Mongol Empire that would come to reign over this region. And on the top right, we have the map, which I think is nice to bring it back to this map because we covered the Song dynasty, we covered the Lao Khitan, or the Khitan Empire, now we have the Shishio, or the Tangut Empire, so really bringing it together before the Mongol Empire will come in. Now, as for the comparison between Yusuf ibn Tashfin and Li Yuanhao, to perhaps learn a bit more about them, leadership, or their respective empires. So, Yusuf ibn Tashfin, his religion and ethnicity. Yusuf ibn Tashfin, or to compare the two in terms of religion and ethnicity. So, Yusuf ibn Tashfin was a Berber ruler who hailed from the Maghreb in the regions of North Africa. He belonged to the Almoravid dynasty, which ruled over parts of North Africa and Al-Andalus in Muslim Spain. So it must be noted, Li Yuanhao was a Tangut ruler who originated in northwestern region of China in what is now modern-day Ningxia province. He belonged to the Tangut ethnic group related to the Tibetans who founded the Western Xia Empire. So maybe it must be noted that both of them were ethnic or religious minorities relatively in the regions. As for their religious and religion and cultural background, Yusuf was a Muslim ruler who adhered to Sunni Islam, whereas Li Yuanhao adhered to Buddhism. Different religions, but both of them showing adherence to a religion and an intent to maintain it in their state. Yusuf ibn Tashfin promoted Islamic culture and religion, sponsoring scholars and constructing mosques and madrasas. Li Yuanhao practiced Buddhism and patronized Buddhist culture and religion in the Western Xia Empire. He also sponsored construction of Buddhist temples and monasteries and encouraged the translation of Buddhist scriptures into the Tangut language. So both of them sort of architecture, both of them patronage of scholars. Maybe one thing that was slightly different is the Li Yuanhao translating into the Tangut language, because maybe, but I would imagine maybe there were some translations into Berber, but I believe Berbers were less, they did not write as much, so maybe something, maybe a little bit more different about Li Yuanhao in terms of his focus on writing a Buddhist text into Tangut, whereas Yusuf ibn Tashfin was sort of more just generally promoting Islam. As for, but not to say Li Yuanhao did not generally promote Buddhism, and he certainly did to a large degree and made it important within the state, as both of them did. So I think they're more similar in that regard. And to further military campaigns and expansions, Li Yuanhao expanded the territory of Western Xia Empire through military conquests, bringing neighboring tribes and territories under his control. He waged wars against Chinese dynasties such as the Song and Liao, and engaged in frequent military campaigns to defend and expand his empire. As for Yusuf ibn Tashfin, he led campaigns to expand territory in the Almoravid Empire, conquering parts of North Africa and the Al-Andalus. He defeated Christian forces in Al-Andalus and defended Muslim territories against the Reconquistas. So I think both of them extended their territories into sort of foreign lands and sort of showed an enterprising spirit that I think makes them more similar than different. As for their diplomacy and governance, Yusuf maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring Muslim and Christian powers, often playing them against each other to maintain his empire's independence. He governed his empire with a centralized administration, implementing laws based on Islamic principles. As for Li Yuanhao, he engaged in diplomacy with neighboring Chinese dynasties and tribal confederations, forming alliances and playing them off against each other to maintain independence with the Western Xia Empire. He governed the Western Xia Empire with a blend of Tangut, Chinese and Tibetan administrative practices, establishing a centralized bureaucracy to manage state affairs. So both of them sort of use the sort of base system. So for example, Yusuf ibn Tashfin generally followed the Abbasid structure, whereas Li Yuanhao generally followed the Chinese structure, but both of them sort of brought their own influences. But both of them sort of, Yusuf ibn Tashfin was effective in using the Abbasid Caliphate to his advantage, whereas Li Yuanhao was effective in putting the Khitan, or the Liao's empire, against the Song Empire. So sort of different, but both very tactful. As for some differences, their geographical locations were certainly different. Yusuf ruled over the Maghreb and Al-Andalus in North Africa in Spain, while Li Yuanhao's domain was situated in northwestern China, in a region of the Western Xia Empire. Different, but also sort of, but I think their behaviors in the two separate regions were somewhat similar, though. At their ethnicity and religion were certainly different too. Yusuf was a Berber Muslim ruler, while Li Yuanhao was a Tangut Buddhist ruler, highlighting the diversity of cultures and religions of the Islamic and Chinese world during their respective periods. But both of them were not necessarily from the majority in terms of ethnicity or background. As for the diplomatic, one being Berber and one being Tangut, relative to perhaps more Arabic or Chinese. As for their diplomatic relations, were they similar? Yusuf engaged in diplomatic relations with Muslim and Christian powers in North Africa and Spain, while Li Yuanhao interacted with neighboring Chinese dynasties and tribal confederations in northwestern China, but they both sort of had a lot of foreign relations, that's for sure. So thus, while Yusuf ibn Tashfin and Li Yuanhao were both significant and inspiring, I would say, rulers during their respective periods, their backgrounds, regions of rule, religious affiliations, and diplomatic strategies differed, reflecting the diversity of political and cultural landscapes in the Islamic and Chinese worlds during the Iranian Intermezzo and Western Shia, or the Western Shia Empire, respectively. So would they both have succeeded if they were to switch spots? Maybe only one would have succeeded. Maybe one would have done better than the other if they had switched spots. It's impossible to tell, but they're certainly different, but they've certainly succeeded in both of their respective circumstances. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires. I'm very grateful for your support. We have covered the Iranian Intermezzo period and the Western Shia Empire, as well Yusuf ibn Tashfin and Li Yuanhao. I'm very grateful for your support. My name is Kalen Ashcroft, and I'd be very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.